If you're new to this series, feel free to just jump back to my earlier video introducing things. But in this video, I'm just gonna dive right into our online training tips. First, I have to start with a bit of an apology, and not just because I'm Canadian, eh? I'm sorry, because the title of this episode is a little bit misleading. Because here's the best tip. Teach! Remember that teaching online is still teaching at its core. Most of the time, you'll want to be yourself and ignore the fact that it's all happening online. Well, as much as you can anyway, and a number of our more detailed tips will help you get past those distractions and blockers. The fundamental goal of teaching is exactly the same regardless of whether it's online. To put some idea from your head into someone else's head. And notice that I said idea and not words or information, right? Teaching is really about helping students understand, not just listen or watch. So I think it's helpful now to break things down. Let's look at the mechanics of teaching, the process and not just the goal. You, as the one doing the teaching, start with the idea in your head. Next, you figure out how to represent and demonstrate that idea using spoken words and visual representations. You figure out how you're going to teach it, right? You then communicate that teaching to your students, which they then receive with their physical senses, like their eyes and ears. Finally, they process what they've seen and heard with their brains to make sense of it, so that the idea becomes their own. That describes teaching both in person and online. But the most fundamental difference with online teaching is that communication part in the middle. If you're teaching a single person face-to-face, then you simply talk with them. Have a conversation like you've done for decades. And even when your class size grows, you can still engage students directly by looking at them as you speak, right? But online teaching really messes with this. If you're recording your lessons in advance, like I am right now, then it becomes completely one-way communication. You lose every bit of body language feedback that would happen in person with live teaching. You don't see anyone's confused looks or their bored ones. Also, sadly, you also miss out on what we love the most, getting to see students' eyes light up with their aha moments when they really get what we're teaching. But even if you're live presenting to a completely webcam-connected class, the communication is still quite different from in-person teaching. You can't, for example, look at anyone specifically to get their attention or to reassure them with your look that it's okay to ask their question, or you'll come back to this more in a minute, or whatever it is. And because the students are usually muted, you have a much harder time working the room, so to speak, to get the whole group excited together. Laughter is contagious, but not when no one else hears it, right? So realize that online teaching generally involves speaking to an audience of one, even when you're teaching lots of people at the same time. Now, this might sound discouraging, but don't worry. Understanding an issue is the first step to overcoming it, and there's a lot you can do. So here's where we come back full circle. Even online, you need to focus on engaging with and inspiring your students to learn the ideas that you're communicating. And not having the in-person feedback means that you should be asking more questions, both before and during the lessons. When you're designing your lessons for online teaching, ask yourself, how could this be misunderstood? And will Chris and Lisa, or whoever's taking your class, understand this? When you put yourself into your students' shoes, you can often anticipate the concerns or struggles they will have, things that you might otherwise have handled through in-person questions they might ask. Then, you can address those issues before they even happen. You can tweak your slide to avoid potential confusion, or add a little extra explanation to clarify some sticking point. All of your students will benefit from things like that. And there's more. When you're delivering your online teaching lesson, whether it's being recorded or watched live, ask your students things like, do you see what I mean here? And do you remember when I mentioned that thing in that earlier lesson? Not only do these things help you come across like a more relatable and caring teacher, but you're also encouraging students to self-assess and do things like pause the video playback or review previous lessons. This ensures that they continue learning and not just listening. In the end, online teaching is still teaching, but the way you communicate is a bit different. So don't be afraid, neither of the change nor of trying out new things to see what works. You can do it! And of course, if you want to learn about more of the things that we've tried and whether they worked, be sure to check out our whole series. I'll see you in the next video.